Good evening, and welcome to Soluble, America's Political Central. Today is Issue Day, Friday, September the 2nd. And our issue today is crimes against children in America. Now, the prophet Emmanuel has said, also known widely in Christian circles as Jesus Christ, has said that whosoever would harm one of these, let a millstone be placed around his neck, and he be cast into the middle of the sea. Now, America is a country that's founded on Christian beliefs. But yet, when crimes are happening to children in America, we don't see this level of example making. And I think that this primarily where Christ was coming from as far as who would harm an innocent child. An innocent child. Because if it's one thing we should all be able to agree on, that, a child is the nearest thing to heaven that we as humans can have in actual human form, because they're totally innocent. So solution time for crimes against children in America. This isn't hard at all. To make an example, which, as I said, I think that that's primarily where Jesus Christ was going when he said what he said as far as whosoever would harm one of these. That's an example that, if sent properly, when someone is found guilty of such a heinous act of hurting or harming a child, it would go a long ways in deterring, preventing, stopping future incidents. Now, this is something that's really dark and twisted that mankind has been doing since the beginning of time. The Hebrew Israelites, they sent their children into the fire for a strange god that, was very much abominable thing in the eyes of the God of Abraham. So for all of us who believe out there, we should understand that, God is thoroughly against any harm that one would bring knowingly to a child. Now, throughout certain cultures, traditions, corporal punishment is definitely accepted, in a lot of cases expected. I mean, it did me well. I didn't understand it when it was happening to me, as a child. But, looking back on it, I'm glad that my mother served me up. Once she had talked to me and trained me in the right way to go, and I was straight towards, dishonesty, immoral, disrespect, stealing, anything of the sort. I was warned, I was taught better, and if I persisted in doing these type of things, then I was dealt with spanking or whipping. And as I said, as a 54-year-old man today, it served me quite well. It went a long ways in shaping and molding me. So one can understand, as I said, this practice of discipline and or punishing a child when they went astray to try to save their soul alive. One can understand that. But here in America, in this modern day and time, looking back, like I said, it's been all throughout history where children have been, in abusive situations, deadly situations, psychologically traumatizing situations. But now, we're in what we proclaim to be a civilized world, a civilized society. We have to take a long look at that. I mean, should a civilized society include a child porn industry? We think not here at Soluble. And I'm pretty sure that, the average everyday American will feel the same way. Now, as of late, is where children are you shaking up even having to go to school. School shootings are pretty much the end thing, the popular thing to do, to make the threat or even to carry out the act. Some, for whatever backwards and warped reason, that is pretty much par for the course a lot sometimes in the thoughts of youngsters today. Now that's as of late, throughout time, when there's been harm done to a child, usually it ends with, molestation, sexual assault. In these cases, which is, been around with what seemed like forever. In most of these cases, when a child is harmed in that way or violated in that way, if you will, in most situations when they find the child is not going to be alive. And think about that for a minute. Just take time to think about that. The child is not going to be alive, and we've lost, and we're still losing. One is one too many. One is one too many. So, in dealing with hard truths, we here at Soluble propose that America would put out an X law in regards to children. An X law, meaning laws that are designed specifically to punish those who would harm a child, who would hurt a child in any kind of cruel way of this fashion. When it comes to school shootings, sexual assault, rape, and then murder. We need an X law to protect American children. I mean, it's not easy. It should be easy. To be a child should be one of the easiest things to do. To, be brought into this world by responsible parents, to be brought up with love, care, and by all accounts, most loving parents out here want their child to have a happy childhood, and they work very hard towards that. Children should be able to go out and play. Children should just be free to be children without risk of abduction. Abduction with, harm that comes in the form of assault on their bodies, and even, like I said, in the worst case scenario, assault and murder. So we feel like X laws are definitely necessary, or should be put on the books when it comes to the executive branch of government, or the legislative branch, if you will. Um, you know, the police, the private investigators, the task force. They do a good job. We'll give them credit where it's due. They do a good job, but the punishment in a lot of these cases doesn't fit the crime, because if America was in fact punishing in a way that sets an example, that sends a message, we here at Soluble feel as if it would be happening a lot less. That crimes against children would be happening a lot less than they are. But nowadays, no one is shuddering to think. No one is shuddering to think, what would happen, or thinking, twice, three times about what they're going to have to endure, what they're going to have to face if they harm a child. So it's happening, more than it should. And as I said, one is too many. We are, as a country, founded on Christian principles, Christian guidelines, Christian beliefs. So Christ has spoken. Now, when you look at the example that has been spoken of by the prophet, the proposed example to make sure that there's an example set, there's a message sent. When we look at that proposed example, this is coming from one of the founding figures of the Christianity belief. So if Christ has said it and it's good enough for him, then surely it can be good enough for a Christian American society. We don't want to cherry pick here. We don't want to cherry pick, but for a country that's founded on Christian beliefs, Christian principles, Christian guidelines, this shouldn't be happening as often as it happens. So here at Soluble, we're going to speak up forcefully for children that are being hurt or harmed in any kind of way. I mean, they're our future. They are precious, and they deserve to be born and raised in a country where they're well protected. But oftentimes here, we're getting the opposite. To hang a millstone around someone's neck and cast them into the middle of the sea is really actually a cruel and unusual punishment. And, ironically, coincidentally, whichever one applies, that statement only comes into play in reference to the suspect here in America, based on American executive laws or the punishment of crimes that are carried out. That only applies to the suspect. We think that's a no-no. We think that is a non-starter as far as deterring crimes against children in America. And if we could get some kind of an X law, some kind of, any crime against a child is an X law, and there's a special kind of punishment for that. There's a special set aside for that. There are examples that have to be set to prevent this. We're going to tighten the screws down on the punishment. We're going to bring the punishment faster. We're not going to just let the suspect or the perpetrator, just languish and linger on the taxpayer's dime, getting 3 hots in a cot, if you will. Having very little fear of when that day of judgment comes, what's going to happen. And it's evident that here at Soluble, it's evident that the punishment is not fitting the crime in this case, because as I said, it's happening all too often. Now, we think one of the most scariest sentences that you can get here in America as far as crime is the killing of a police officer. Contrary to what, a lot of people out here may think, most criminals will shudder to think, what's going to happen to them if they just go out and in cold blood murder a police officer. That sentence, that even carries a life sentence with no possibility of parole. In some states, it even carries the death penalty. And that's why it's a very rare occurrence. It happens. It does happen, the murdering of a police officer, but it's a very rare occurrence. So our position here at Soluble is that if the punishment would be a little bit tougher on the crime against the child, it would serve the same purpose. It would be a big deterrent. It would go a long ways in stopping or making these monsters, these low lives, these cold-hearted, unconscionable people think twice, 3 times before they would harm or put their hands on a child. Now, there are other ways to make, suspects, perpetrators who have been found guilty of this crime, who have been found guilty of violating possible in the future X law, which would be a variation of laws protecting children, a variation of punishments to fit said crime that was committed against the child. There are a lot of ways to do it. I mean, you know, hanging a millstone and casting into the middle of the sea. That is, we feel like here at Sawyer, but that is a great example. I mean, think about it. How many perverts out here? How many child murderers would be willing to go forward with the thoughts in their heart and mind to harm a child if they knew that this was waiting on them on the other side? It wouldn't be very many. We wouldn't have near as many as we have in the prison institutions today if we would just set a stricter example. And that's where we're at basically here at Soluble as far as, what is the solution to this? The punishment has to fit the crime. The punishment has to fit the crime. And, you know, say like a 9/11 hijacker or suspected hijacker or suspected terrorist in the time period in America, going back in history, any time from 2001 to say 2010, any, thing that they could think of to get information out of a terrorist, whether it was waterboarding, whether it was, hanging them up until their feet were barely touching the floor. There are some things that we can do on that same level. Um, you know, punishment for a terrorist should be just punishment for someone who will harm a child should be just as strict, if not stricter, than punishment for a terrorist. It's worse in the eyes of us here at Soluble. It's worse when you would go out and willfully harm a child than if you were to try to hurt grown-ups who are just going about their everyday lives as they may be. It's bad when you would do that to grown-ups, but it's worse, and it's even worse when you would harm a child. So, staying on point as much as we can because we don't have a lot of time here tonight. X laws across the board, special set of laws that are set up to protect children. What do you say, America? If we have any listeners out there that want to comment, they want to add any suggestion, any point of view to this topic tonight on this issue of crimes against children in America, speak out. What should the punishment be? What should the punishment be? That's the question we're going to ask. Now, it needs to be something harsh. It needs to be something harsh. With a serious message sent. Because, it's harsh on the child. It's very tragic. They don't understand. They're not at an age of understanding. These things shape them. Those that survive, those that make it through the hell, these things shape them for the rest of their lives. And it can trigger them to be unstable, criminal minded, mentally disabled, mentally, shaken up to the point where, their lives are never the same again. And these are innocent children. These are innocent children. So there you have it. As we said, we know that any grown up any grown-up, including myself, is innocent until proven guilty. But all children are innocent. All children are innocent. There's no guilt there for anything. I mean, stealing a cookie out of the cookie jar. That's between the child and their parents, of course. That doesn't have any relevance whatsoever to the innocence, when it comes to the innocence that you're stealing, that affects their mental being, their whole makeup, their character, their personality. That is shaped through, love, nurturing, family inclusion, family instilling a sense of self-worth into the child. But, you know, crimes against children in any other way, in any other situation, is totally unacceptable. It's totally unacceptable. I mean, you have the perverts out here who are, stalking children, constantly trying to find creative ways to lure children, with pets, with balloons, with candy, constantly. And, as I said, it has to be an example that is sent. And why can't we do that as a civilized society? If we are truly a civilized society, we would try to eradicate this. We would try to make crimes against children unheard of in America. That's the goal going forward. That is the goal going forward. And nothing can be more swifter in bringing an end to this tragic way of doing things. This something that's totally unacceptable, to harm a child. To harm a child. I mean, America's had, domestic wars in the past. The war on drugs, the war on terror, which wasn't a domestic war. It was fought abroad and here at home also. But these are times where we went to war against ourselves to stop a serious problem, to stop a clear and present danger that was happening in American society on a regular basis. So, what about the war against crimes committed against children? What about the war against the child porn industry? This is a very necessary war, and it's a war that's worth waging. It's a war that's worth waging. When our innocent children can't even go outside and play, can't, you know, be 3 to 5 feet away from a loved one without being in danger of getting snatched up or being hurt. Now, you know, the perpetrators, they know, they know what they're doing, and they're at ease with it. They're at ease with it. They're committing these crimes against children, and then they're strolling into the courtroom looking for a good lawyer to get them off on temporary insanity, or bringing up the fact that they had a harsh childhood or something of that nature to make the jury or the American legal system sympathetic to them, and as to why they would do something this reprehensible. And it's really, in my point of view, it's really a cop out. It's really a cop out. I mean, they're getting caught, but it's rare because they're planning. They're methodically planning. They're constantly looking for a vulnerable spot to catch a child in. A vulnerable situation where they can be able to verbally communicate with the child to pick them up, and they're pulling out all the stops. But it wouldn't be happening. It would stop almost on a dime if we would, follow the example of Christ as as a Christian nation, as a Christian nation. So, we're really being, we're being disobedient in our faith, and we're not, you know, taking the word of Christ to heart, the example that he set. And it's right there. It's right there, written. It's written right there in Matthew, Mark, Luke. Whosoever would harm one of these, let a millstone be placed around his neck, and he be cast into the middle of the sea. Now, when it came to the harlot and the Jews getting ready to persecute her in whatever way, Christ also said, let he who is without sin cast the first stone. So, we're looking at, as a Christian nation who are followers of Christ, we're looking at what is written. It's the law of Christ. And if Christians can't do something as far as punishment, then, you're not really carrying out your wholehearted Christian duty there when it comes to children. Because basically what, the prophet is saying here is, like, as I said, this is an example punishment, and this is adults who should be going all out to protect children. And these are some of the extremes that we will go to. We will put a millstone around your neck, and we will roll you out into the deep blue, and we'll drop you off there. If it's good enough for Christ, surely it should be good enough for his followers to let children have a childhood in America. If it's good enough for Christ, as I said one more time, it should be good enough for his followers. Now, we can really push for this. We can really push for a set of X laws. And these laws, are laws that pertain to any crime that would be committed against a child. And since children are special, we should have a special set aside in the laws when it comes to punishment for someone who would hurt or harm one. We really could take the lead in this. Throughout the history of mankind, we can, going into the 21st century here, we can really take the lead on this and, do something that's very well pleasing in God's eyes, and it will make America a better place also. If a child is lashing out, if a child is doing anything other than, laughing, being happy, being silly, any of the things that children do, the playful things that they do. If a child is not doing that, then it's up to us as adults, as Christian adults, to be able to say, well, something's going on here, because that's abnormal behavior for a child. Because you can best believe that one of the main things that a child is going to express in most cases is happiness. Of course, if they're told to go to bed, or they can't have an extra cookie, or something of that nature that they want to do that we as adults know is not good for them, of course, they're not going to be happy. They're going to pout. They're going to pout. It's the nature of the way things are. They're going to pout. They're going to put on a sad face. They might even throw a little tantrum. Who knows? But that's, that's, like I said, that's the nature of a child. But other than that, other than being told no, or not right now, or you can't, a child by nature, they're happy. So, this is just a small, subtle sign that, that we can look for. Because if you see it, if you detect it, then more than likely, that is telling you that there's something in this child's life that is not right. It's off balance. Not necessarily say there's being a crime being committed against the child, but our position here at Soluble is that children are special. They're special. They're special gifts from God. And we as adults should be doing everything in our power to take care of them. And if that includes, getting our government involved, because it seems as if they're sitting on their hands on this issue. It seems as if they can't, pull their head out of the sand on this issue. And as I said, it's been, we've been had these green fruit eaters. I like to refer to them. And I say that because in reference to the fruit of the womb, you have a child here, and this is, like I said, this has been happening as it relates to, the school shootings of children not being safe in school, right now. This is as of late, the school shooting. They've really taken off since Columbine. It's become like a popular thing. But, these green fruit eaters, they've been around forever. And, as adults, especially men, because, we are the perpetrators. So we have to hold ourselves accountable. We know that the child is not ready for things that adults do, things that adults engage in. But you will have these green fruit eaters. I mean, can you imagine yourself going to a tree and picking a green plum that's not fruity, that's not juicy, that's not soft, it's not ripe. So it's not time for picking of that piece of fruit. But in reference to the child, that's just like green fruit. It's not ripe. It's not ready to be picked. It's not ready to be touched. It's not ready to be tampered with in no kind of way when it comes to sexual relations, things of romance, things of foreplay, anything of that nature, anything of a sexual nature. We know that they're not ready for it as adult men. And as I said, that's why, here at Sawyer, we refer to these type of men as, green fruit eaters. And, you to actually go out to a tree that has any type of fruit, any type. It doesn't have to be a plum, any type of fruit that's not ripe. You won't see a grown man, especially, because like I said, these are the main perpetrators of these type of atrocities that are being committed towards children. You won't see him go out and pick a piece of green fruit and eat it with a straight face. And then, once he's consumed it, he will go out and pick another piece. Everybody wants the fruit ripe. Everybody wants the fruit when it's ripe. Everyone in their right mind. So, in my lifetime, I haven't seen it. And if you do attempt to do something as foolish as that, then you're going to be sick. So the same thing relates to children. It's the fruit of the womb, and it's green. And it's green. It's not to be tampered with. So, this is where we feel like the X law should come into play on things like this, psychologically damaging children, young girls, young boys. What can we do about it? Will we draw the line? Not until the people stand up as a whole. You got grown women out here, hot and bothered, ripe. The fruit is very ripe. But, we as mad men, in a lot of cases, we want to tamper with a child. And it's not right. It's not right. And it's evident that America hasn't taken it serious. They haven't, tightened the screws down as far as they can tighten them, because men are not wholeheartedly afraid to commit such a crime. And since, we have the woman, through a loving and thoughtful God, we have the woman there for comfort, for sexual gratification, if you will. And that's all we need as men. That's all we need. We shouldn't be, dwelling on a child, even looking that way, even thinking about it. But in order for it to stop, the look, the thought, excuse me, the actual act, we need X laws on the books. And as I said, these X laws will cover any crime that could be committed towards a child that is harmful and damaging to that child. And this would make it stop. This would make it stop. Cruel and unusual punishment applies in these X laws. If we can get them on the books, cruel and unusual punishment will apply here. It should apply because this is holy ground we're talking about. This is holy ground. A child should not have to have eyes in the back of their heads. A child should not have to be subjected to home confinement because the outside environment is not safe. And in this set of X laws, it would go a long ways in having something written in where citizens can be quickly deputized to subdue, to take into custody, to do whatever is in their power to do until the cops show up. Once the crime is reported, we should have this in the X laws that as I said, any citizen of any stripe can be immediately deputized once they see it. Once they see it, and it maybe even take the he say she say and make it admissible in court if someone is seeing such a thing happening. If someone sees this happening and they take it upon themselves to say, I saw this person attempt to abduct this child, or they had a successful abduction, and once I got behind them and started following them or whatever, they threw the child out of the car, they did this or they did that. That should be enough. I mean, who would make up a farce? Any personal vendettas or whatever, it can be figured out. We've hammered out a lot of things. We've rewritten a lot of laws on the books. As of late, when it comes to youth smoking, different ways in which the police have to engage citizens. We've always been able to tweak it, fix it, make it a little tougher to send a tougher message. What can be more called for? What could be more called for? Stiffer sentences, stiffer punishment, quicker punishments, cruel and unusual punishments. That's our solution here at Soluble. Let X laws come to pass. Let them be, put on the books in American society, in legislation that we send to the floor, whether it be state or federal. We need protections against children. And as I said, with the school shooting, that's as of late. No one is worse than the other. No one is worse than the other. You have these school shooters, and a lot of them are at home with their parents. A lot of them are home with their parents, and they're posting on social media. They're commenting on other people's posts. About their desires, their cruel intentions. Their dark, wicked thoughts. They're posting. And there's also ways that the parent can, if they're involved in their child's life like they should be, these things can be prevented. But once again, these are the X laws. Since these kids who are primarily school shooters are school-aged kids themselves, then it has to be on the parents. It can be written into these X laws, and X laws being any crime or any harm or anything that's committed towards a child, to hurt a child, to bring harm to a child. These are X laws. X meaning children. Children meaning totally off limits, totally uncalled for. X meaning cruel and unusual punishment. Because if it was ever a time for it, to send a message. In America right now, in the year of our Lord, September the 2nd, 2022, if there was ever a time to send a message and a way to send a message to those who would hurt children, cruel and unusual punishment is definitely called for. That's our belief as far as having a solution to this problem. It's gut wrenching. These are not even my children. But because of the humanitarian in me, I feel the pain. I hurt. It pulls at my heartstrings when I see it. And as I said, these are not even my children. And there's the humanity that is in all of us should cry out the same way. To say enough is enough. I mean, we're doing enough harm as it is to each other as adults. But to start setting your sights and your eyes on a child, pure as the driven snow. Once again, setting your sights on harming or hurting a child, pure as the driven snow. It takes a special kind of evil to do that. So it's time, it's time. It's past due. A war on the child porn industry, a war on crimes committed against children. And this war will involve search and seizure. Lock them up and throw away the key. These laws will consist of cruel and unusual punishment. The punishment has to fit the crime. If a child is raped and murdered, or abducted and sexually assaulted and murdered, and the perpetrator is caught, America has the power to send a message. And in that case, where a child is abducted, sexually assaulted, murdered, we ought to have the stomach for cruel and unusual punishment. We ought to have the stomach for it. We ought to be eager to do it. We ought to be willing. Because, as I've said, Christ has already spoken. We know his position on it. We know his position on it. So as Christians, who are followers of Christ, we here at Soluble, our position is that, you should follow this example. We as Christians, we're striving. We're right there, the flesh is weak oftentimes, but we're striving, in our Christian beliefs. We're striving to get better, to do better. And as humans, that's what we should be doing. But this one is not hard. This is a no-brainer. And that's why, the prophet set aside punishment for the harlot versus punishment for those who would hurt a child. Can you see the difference there? Do you notice the difference? For the grown harlot, it was let he who is without sin cast the first stone. Because in most cases, there is no grown up without sin. We've all fell short. And, it is our Christian duty to strive to get it right, to come back into compliance, to come back into walking the straight and narrow that our Christian faith calls for us to do. But you see the difference there. You can see the difference. The grown harlot, let he who is without sin cast the first stone, because we're all kind of in the same boat here. We can't be too harsh of judges when we have our own house in disarray. Our own Christian walk is somewhat in disarray and not where it should be. But with the child, which is pure as the driven snow, which is totally innocent, Christ said, whosoever will harm one of these, let a millstone be hung around his neck and he be cast into the middle of the sea. That's a heck of a difference. That's what we call a stark contrast. So the leader of Christianity has spoken. The leader of Christianity has spoken. And it's going to go a long ways going forward to showing, will America go wholeheartedly after perpetrators who will harm children? Nothing is acceptable. Nothing is understandable, meaning even crimes against grown-ups. Sometimes when it comes out in the wash, you're dealing with emotions here. You're dealing with betrayal. You're dealing with, double crossing. You're dealing with infidelity. You're dealing with deceptions with money. And even though it's not acceptable, it's somewhat understandable. We're grown. We're grown-ups. We make decisions oftentimes, and we have to live with the consequences thereof. But children, what have they done to deserve this type of treatment? To have to come up in this type of America where we can't make them feel safe? What have they done? Now, it's not hard. It just takes willing hearts and minds to come back into Christian compliance as to what the prophet has said when it comes to protecting children. What the prophet has said should happen to those or to individuals who would think about harming a child. If we practice it, children will be a lot safer in America. They can go outside and play again. They can be kids again. Totally innocent. I've never met a strange child in my lifetime. I've met children, all races, different ages. But the reason why I say I've never met a strange child, because every child, to me, in my dealings with them, is the same level of love, desire to protect, desire to set a good example, desire to make sure that they're in a safe environment. So that's why they're not strange to me, because I'm used to treating them all the same. So I'm never meeting a child who is a stranger. That child is, in a lot of cases, considered like my child, because if they're around me, as long as I'm in their presence, it's my duty. It's my humanitarian duty to protect that child, even if I didn't birth them into the world, even if they are of no blood relation to me. If I'm working over here and the child is playing over there, of no relation, of no blood relation, but if I see something happening to that child, or if I see someone trying to put that child in harm's way, then, as the prophet has spoken, I could take it upon myself to protect that child like it was my child. And that's my Christian duty. That's what my faith leads me to believe. And that's the direction that my faith leads me in. That instantly, there is a child, and my parental instincts kick in, even though I'm not the parent of said child. But my intuition to protect, it comes out immediately, automatically. It's just natural. It's human nature. So, there are dark things, there are dark places lurking in the hearts of man. I'm one. So, I think it goes a long ways for me. I'm not gonna pat myself on the back here, but I think it can go a long way for me to say, I'm gonna call out my fellow man. I'm gonna call out my fellow man because, where we have the power to protect, we're not using it. We're not using it when it comes to children here in America in particular. And America is constantly the example for other nations around the world. And this is one we definitely need to take the lead on to protect children, to establish, form, bring lawmakers to the table that will put out a set of X laws for the whole country to see, for the whole nation to see, for the perverts to see that, going forward in the future, if I commit this crime and get caught, there is no, getting my lawyer to help me wiggle out of it. There is no pleading insanity. Nothing. None of the above. That's going to be sympathetic towards the perpetrator who has committed violence, harm against a child. We have the power to do it in this country. We went to war. We've had domestic wars. We went to war within the country for things that would bring harm to American society, tear down American society, constantly put American lives at risk or in harm's way. We went to war against those elements, against those things. But yet, in my lifetime, I haven't seen a war for crimes against children, for America to go on the warpath to protect children who are totally innocent. And men, we have to do a better job. We have to do a better job of speaking up, standing up. It is what it is. If duty calls for it, then you have to, you have to do what you have to do. I have a 17-year-old daughter, and I love her more than life itself. She's raised right. I've taught her things. Her mother's taught her things. And we try to do whatever is in our power to make sure that she's a well-rounded adult. Now, if something happens to my child, I'm not inclined to wait for evidence or look at whether the evidence is sufficient or whether it can be proven. If in my heart I know and I'm convinced, then I'm subject to take the law into my own hands. I'm subject to take the law into my own hands. I feel like, that would be following my faith, following my spiritual beliefs, regardless of what American law is doing or American legislation is doing to protect my child. So, in closing and coming to a conclusion, what can be done? Here at Soluble, like I said, we recommend X laws. But right now is a dangerous and sad time in America to be a child, when a child just can't be a child. When a child can't be a child because of the dangers that are lurking from perverts, predators. who America has the power to send a message through. America has the power to take these perpetrators, these perverts, these lowlifes, these unconscionable men. America has the power to send a message through laws and through execution of laws once the crime has been committed. But the question is now, will America do its Christian duty as it relates to the example that the prophet has given on whosoever would harm one of these? It's right there. It's right there, uttered and stated by the leader, the founding leader of your spiritual and faithful beliefs. As far as it relates to Christ, it's right there. He said it. He meant it. So what are we going to do? What are we going to do when it comes to protecting children? We can't be hypocritical about this. We can't kick the can down the road continually and let another child be snatched. Another child is abducted, murdered, or what have you. And one of the best things that we can do towards our children, and I learned this, a little too late as a parent, I must admit, is to listen. Is to listen to our children. But as it relates to crimes against children, then, we as men, we ought to be ashamed. We ought to be ashamed. It has to be enough good men. It has to be enough good men to stand up and overcome this. It's not something that should be swept under the rug or dismissed as not that big of a deal. But it seems right now that day-to-day America eats its young. It puts young children in harm's way when it has the power to take them out of harm's way. It keeps them there. And it's going to be telling as far as just how much of a Christian nation that this country is, because this is just as low as we can get as human beings. To take something that's the nearest thing to heaven on earth, the one thing, a child, that is the nearest thing to heaven on earth, and bring harm to them, to harm them in any kind of way. So we're asking for X laws. We're asking, for American politicians. We're asking American citizens to get involved, to push for X laws, which will be laws that relate to crimes committed against children. And in these laws, we want cruel and unusual punishment to apply to one found guilty. We want speedy execution of the cruel and unusual punishment. Because these are the links, these are the extremes that we should be willing to go to protect our children. They're innocent, they're pure. And we should protect them and care for them as such. We'll take an object that is not a living thing, can't breathe, can't talk, but we'll take a material object and treat it with more reverence and give it more care than we will a child in this country. And it's got to stop. It has to stop. I mean, we will probably revisit this topic sometime in the near future. We will go out and seek stats and look at just how extreme it is, how deep the harm runs, as far as how often a child is harmed in America, how often is a child abducted in America. They have these things where, you know, every 30 seconds or every minute there's someone having a heart attack in America. We want to look at, we're going to get down to the nitty-gritty of the stats when it comes to what's happening to children in this country. And we're going to come back and revisit this topic at some time in the near future. I mean, this is one that should hit home with everyone. Crimes against children in America. We can go a long ways in setting an example for the world with X laws on the books. X laws. And as I said, under that headlining X laws are laws strictly designed to prevent crimes or harm being done to children in this country. And it'll go a long ways in stopping it. It'll go a long ways in stopping it. Cruel and unusual punishment. Swift execution of punishment. But most definitely, we feel as if, according to American courtroom legislative language, as far as cruel and unusual punishment, we definitely feel like the prophet went there. We definitely feel as though the prophet went there when he suggested what he suggested for those who would harm one of these. But it's necessary. That's how serious it is. When you're harming a child, you're going to an extreme low. You're going to an extreme low. So the punishment has to fit the crime. And that's why the prophet spoke for the example that he spoke for someone who will harm one to be dealt with in that kind of way. This extreme low, it calls for an extreme punishment. So we're going to see if America has the guts, if it has the wherewithal, if it's anywhere in their Christian beliefs. If you're a Christian, if you're followers of Christ, which, as I said, this country was founded on Christian beliefs, then in America, Christians ought to practice what Christ, their leader, has preached. Christians ought to go ahead and practice what Christ, their leader, has preached, and give some extreme punishment to those in America who would bring harm to children. This is going to conclude tonight's issue day, which is crimes against children in America. But as I said, we will monitor, we will investigate, we will do fact finding, and we will revisit this subject and hammer away at it, because it's totally uncalled for, it's unacceptable, and so it should be with every American adult who has a heart, who has a desire to serve humanity before their time is called to go back to the other side. We're looking for a voice. We're looking for opinions. We're looking for, what do you feel will bring an end to this crisis? What do you feel will bring an end to it? We welcome any feedback. Please bring it on behalf of children in America. Please bring it. So until we visit this subject again, this is Soluble signing off. We'd like to thank you for tuning in. We say good night, and just remember the children for today and tomorrow, and whatever we can do to make it safe for them in this country, let's put our best foot forward in doing so. So until this subject is revisited again in the near future, this is Soluble saying thank you for tuning in, and we're signing off. Good night.